The grandfather woke up before the sun, his body aching from years of work and long walks. Even at his age, he never wanted to show weakness in front of his family. His small house was simple, with walls made of clay and a tin roof that rattled when the wind blew. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and earth. It was quiet except for the soft breathing of his wife and the distant crowing of a rooster. That morning was different. His granddaughter had fallen ill during the night. She was coughing constantly, and her forehead felt hot and heavy. The grandmother had tried to give her some herbs, but they did little to bring comfort. The grandfather looked at his granddaughter and felt a pang in his heart. He could not bear the thought of losing her, and he knew that the medicine she needed was only available in the town, many kilometers away. He ate a small piece of bread and drank water from a clay cup. There was no time to waste. He put on his worn-out shoes, grabbed a small bag, and filled it with a few coins, a notebook, and some bread. He kissed his granddaughter lightly on her forehead and whispered, "I will be back soon. Stay strong." His voice was gentle but firm, full of determination. The grandmother's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. She knew that he would not stop until he found the medicine. The road ahead was not easy. It stretched through hills and dusty paths. The sun was still low, and the air smelled of morning dew and wild grass. Every step was a challenge. His legs were stiff and his breathing was heavy, but he refused to give up. Each step was a promise to his granddaughter that he would not let her suffer. He passed by fields where farmers were beginning their day. Some waved at him, recognizing him as the man who often helped others without asking for anything in return. He smiled back, but there was no time for conversation. His focus was on reaching the town as quickly as possible. Along the way, he stopped by a small stream to drink water and rest for a few minutes. The cool water refreshed him, and he thought of his granddaughter's smile. He remembered how she loved to run around the fields, how she would pick flowers for him, and how her laughter would fill the house. He shook his head slightly, pushing the emotion aside. There was no room for distractions now. The sun climbed higher, and the heat began to press down on him. Sweat soaked his shirt, and his throat felt dry. He drank the last of the water from his bag, knowing he would find another source soon. His feet ached and blisters had formed, but he did not stop. Every pain was a small price to pay for the life of someone he loved. As he walked, he remembered the nights when he had worked late in the fields, carrying heavy loads, and walking long distances to earn enough money for his family. He thought about the years he had spent helping neighbors, fixing roofs, and sharing what little he had. None of that seemed to matter now except the mission in front of him. His granddaughter needed him more than ever. By mid-morning, he reached a small village. He entered a shop to ask for directions and was greeted warmly by the shopkeeper. The grandfather explained what he needed. The shopkeeper listened carefully, his eyebrows raised in concern. The medicine was only available in the town several kilometers away. He could give the grandfather some advice on the fastest route, but he could not help more. The grandfather thanked him, paid the small amount for directions, and stepped back onto the dusty path. He continued walking, moving with a steady pace. Time seemed to stretch, and the road never seemed to end. He passed through groves of trees, their shade offering brief relief from the sun. Birds flew overhead, singing softly, as if encouraging him forward. He remembered the stories his own father had told him when he was a child. Stories of endurance, courage, and responsibility. His father had walked far distances too, carrying goods and helping people, always with a humble heart. The grandfather felt a connection to those stories now. They were not just tales. They were lessons he lived by. And now he was walking for a lesson of his own, love and care for his family. By noon, hunger pressed in, but he had only a small piece of bread left. He stopped under a large tree and ate slowly, savoring every bite. He drank from a small water bottle he had carried, careful not to waste a single drop. He could feel the fatigue in his muscles, the pain in his feet, but he reminded himself that the end was near. Every step brought him closer to saving his granddaughter. Along the way, he met a woman carrying a basket of vegetables. She noticed his tired expression and offered him some water. He smiled gratefully and accepted it. She asked why he was walking alone under the harsh sun. He explained simply that his granddaughter was sick, and he needed medicine from the town. The woman's eyes softened and she wished him luck. Her kindness gave him a little boost of energy. The path became steeper as he approached a hill leading to the town. His legs trembled with the effort, but he refused to stop for long. He rested briefly, leaning on a tree, catching his breath. He thought about his granddaughter lying at home, waiting for him. That thought pushed him forward step by step until he finally reached the outskirts of the town. The streets were crowded and noisy, a sharp contrast to the quiet of his village. He weaved through people, trying to find the pharmacy he had been told about. His shoes were dusty, his clothes damp with sweat, and yet his determination never wavered. He asked directions from a few passers-by, and finally he saw the small pharmacy sign. Inside the pharmacy, he spoke quickly to the pharmacist, explaining the urgency. The pharmacist listened carefully and then nodded. He handed the grandfather the medicine, along with instructions on how to use it. The grandfather thanked him profusely, paying the small amount with the coins he had carried. Every coin felt precious, but there was no time to worry about that now. With the medicine in his bag, he stepped back onto the road, ready to return home. The journey back felt longer, heavier, but he kept moving. The thought of his granddaughter's relief and her smile kept him going. He walked through the same paths, feeling each kilometer in his bones, but his heart was light with hope. By evening, the village came into view. The grandfather's pace quickened and his mind raced with thoughts of his granddaughter resting at home. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fields. He felt a surge of energy and pushed himself forward, ignoring the aching pain in his legs. Finally, he reached his small house. His wife rushed out, worry written across her face. He held up the bag showing the medicine. Relief washed over her and she helped him inside. The grandfather went straight to his granddaughter's side, gently giving her the medicine and making sure she swallowed it carefully. He stayed with her, holding her hand, watching as the fever slowly began to break. The grandmother and granddaughter both looked at him with gratitude and awe. They knew the effort he had made, the pain he had endured, and the love that had carried him through the long journey. The grandfather sat down exhausted, but there was a quiet satisfaction in his eyes. He had kept his promise. He had walked kilometers for medicine, driven by love, duty, and courage. And in that moment, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that his family was safe because of his perseverance. After the long day of walking and retrieving the medicine, the grandfather's life slowly returned to its usual rhythm. The small house, humble and simple, became a place of warmth and care. His granddaughter's health improved steadily, and every cough grew weaker until she could laugh and play again. But the grandfather did not stop there. His heart was always looking out for others, just as it had carried him to the town for his granddaughter. He spent his days helping neighbors with small tasks. If someone's roof leaked, he would climb up and repair it. If a farmer needed help carrying heavy sacks of grain, he was there without asking for anything. His work was quiet, unnoticed by most, but it had a lasting effect on those around him. People in the village knew him as a man who gave without expecting, a person whose hands were always ready to help. One afternoon, a young boy approached him near the river where he often washed clothes. The boy had a torn shirt and asked if the grandfather could mend it. Smiling, he took the shirt and fixed it carefully, sewing each tear with patience. The boy's eyes shone with happiness, and he ran back home to show his mother. The grandfather continued his chores, feeling a quiet joy in these small moments of kindness. He often visited the market to buy supplies, walking slowly through the bustling stalls. People began to notice him more than before, not because of anything he said, but because of the calm presence he carried. A woman selling vegetables would call out, offering a small discount, saying, "For you, my friend, take a little extra." He would smile and thank her, never taking more than he needed. But the gesture reminded him that kindness could return in many forms. Even in the evenings, he would sit outside his house on the small wooden bench, watching children play in the fields nearby. Sometimes he would tell them stories of the past, tales of courage and perseverance, but always in simple words that they could understand. The children listened with wide eyes, captivated by the grandfather's voice, which carried wisdom and experience. He told them of the importance of helping others, being honest and never giving up, lessons he had lived by every day. His wife noticed the change in the village as well. People were slowly starting to recognize the grandfather's efforts, though it was quiet, almost invisible. A neighbor might drop by with a small gift of fruit or bread, saying, "We are grateful for everything you do." The grandfather would shake his head, insisting that there was no need for thanks. It was the right thing to do, and that was enough for him. One day a letter arrived, delivered by a young messenger from a nearby town. The grandfather opened it carefully and read through the lines, feeling a mixture of surprise and humility. The letter was from a man who had heard of his journey to fetch medicine for his granddaughter. He explained that the grandfather's determination and courage had inspired him, and that he wanted to meet him in person to understand more about his life. The grandfather simply nodded, quietly pleased, but he did not seek attention or praise. The next morning he walked to the village center, where the visitor had arranged to meet him. The visitor was polite and formal, yet there was warmth in his eyes. He asked about the grandfather's life, his struggles, and his family. The grandfather answered simply, telling the truth without exaggeration. He spoke of long walks, hard work, and the love he held for his family. He spoke of his hope to see his granddaughter healthy again, and how that drove him forward during the difficult journey. The visitor listened attentively, nodding often. He seemed genuinely moved by the grandfather's humility and dedication. He asked about the villagers and how they supported each other. The grandfather explained that in their small community, everyone shared what they could, helping one another through hard times. It was not about wealth or status, he said. It was about heart and effort. After their meeting, the visitor left with a promise to return. The grandfather continued his daily routines, tending to his small garden, repairing what needed fixing, and caring for his family. Life remained simple, but there was a sense that something new was quietly beginning. He did not know yet what the future held, but he continued his path with patience, as he always had. Meanwhile, in the village, people began speaking more about the grandfather. Children would run home to tell their parents stories of his selflessness. Neighbors would quietly nod in respect when he passed by. Even those who had never met him directly felt an impression of his quiet strength and unassuming character. The grandfather never sought recognition, but it was slowly coming, like a gentle tide building in the distance. One afternoon, as he rested under the shade of a tree, a young couple approached carrying a small child. They had heard of the grandfather's acts and wanted advice on how to live a life of honesty and care. He spoke to them simply, sharing his daily habits and principles. "Work hard," he said. "Help when you can, and never think that kindness is wasted." The couple thanked him sincerely, taking his words to heart. Days passed, and the seasons began to change. The grandfather continued his quiet life, but the world around him had begun to notice. The respect for him was growing, though it was always accompanied by humility and quiet dignity. He did not let it affect him. He still walked the same paths, repaired roofs, helped neighbors, and cared for his family, with the same devotion as before. His granddaughter, now fully recovered, often helped him in the small garden. She would run around laughing, bringing joy not only to the grandfather and grandmother but to the entire household. He would sometimes pause watching her, feeling a deep satisfaction in knowing that his efforts had made a difference. She had become a symbol of hope and resilience, a reminder that love and dedication could overcome any obstacle. Evenings were spent in reflection. He would sit quietly, listening to the soft sounds of nature and the village settling down for the night. His wife would sit beside him, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes just sharing the silence. They had endured hardships together and had faced life with patience and courage. They had learned that true happiness did not come from wealth or recognition, but from love, integrity, and the small acts of care that filled their days. In the quiet moments, he would sometimes think back to the day he walked to the town to fetch the medicine. Every ache in his body, every step of pain had been worth it. He had witnessed the strength of human spirit both in himself and in his family. That journey had been more than just a mission for medicine. It had been a lesson in endurance, love, and selflessness, one that would remain with him forever. Neighbors would occasionally stop by to share small gifts or words of gratitude. A loaf of bread, a basket of vegetables, a few coins. They were simple tokens, yet they reflected the growing respect and love for the grandfather. He accepted them politely, but never let them change who he was. He remained humble, continuing to live with the same principles he had always followed. The village children continued to flock around him, listening to stories, learning about courage and honesty, inspired by the grandfather's quiet life. Parents noticed the lessons their children were absorbing, and slowly the values of kindness, humility, and perseverance began to spread through the village. The grandfather had never aimed to teach or influence others. but his actions had done exactly that. One evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, the grandfather sat outside and watched the village. He felt content, yet he also felt a quiet anticipation. Life had always been full of surprises, and he sensed that the next chapter of his journey might be approaching. He did not know what it would bring, but he knew that he would face it with the same courage, love, and determination that had carried him this far. The days rolled by, each one filled with small acts of kindness and care. Life remained simple but rich in meaning. The grandfather continued to serve his family, his neighbors, and the children who looked up to him. His story was quietly spreading, not through fame or wealth, but through the enduring impact of his heart and actions. And though he remained unaware of the bigger changes his life might bring, he walked forward with patience and humility, always guided by love and the simple belief that helping others was the most important duty one could fulfill. Months passed, and life in the small village continued quietly, but the grandfather's reputation grew without him noticing. People from nearby villages would sometimes mention the story of the man who walked kilometers to get medicine for his granddaughter. It was told not with exaggeration but with genuine admiration. One day something happened that would mark a turning point in his simple life. A young teacher, visiting the village for a school project, had heard of the grandfather's journey. She had come to write about acts of courage and kindness in rural communities. When she met him, she was struck by his quiet dignity, the way he carried himself with humility and strength. She wanted to learn more, to understand the life of someone who seemed ordinary on the surface but extraordinary in deeds. The teacher asked to visit his home several times, sitting with him as he went about his daily routines. She watched him tend the garden, repair broken furniture, and help neighbors who stopped by. She observed the way he spoke to his granddaughter, gently guiding her, listening to her, and teaching her through example. Everything she saw convinced her that the grandfather's story deserved a wider audience. Word of her visit spread quickly. Soon others came to see him, some out of curiosity, some out of admiration. A local journalist arrived with a small camera, eager to record his life and tell it to the world. The grandfather welcomed them politely but never sought attention. He continued to do what he had always done, caring for his family, helping neighbors, and living with integrity. One morning, a man in formal clothes arrived at the village. He introduced himself as someone who worked with a charitable organization and had heard of the grandfather's dedication. He wanted to meet him and discuss ways to support families in the village. The grandfather listened quietly, nodding occasionally, and explained his thoughts simply. He said that people did not need charity as much as they needed guidance, encouragement, and a sense of community. His words carried wisdom, and the man took notes, impressed by the grandfather's perspective. The visits continued, and soon, the grandfather's story began to reach a wider audience beyond the village. Letters arrived from people who wanted to help or learn from him. Some offered small gifts, others simply sent messages of admiration. Yet the grandfather remained humble, never changing his ways or seeking recognition. He believed that true acts of kindness did not require reward. Despite the attention, his daily life stayed grounded. He would walk to the market, exchange greetings with shopkeepers, and help anyone who asked. The children still ran to him for stories and advice, and he continued to teach them about courage, honesty, and perseverance. Even as more people learned about him, he never let it alter his principles. One afternoon, a young woman from a nearby town came to meet him. She was a doctor who had heard of his journey to fetch medicine and was inspired by his determination. She asked for advice on improving healthcare in villages. The grandfather spoke from his heart, explaining the challenges families faced in reaching medical help and the importance of community support. She listened carefully, promising to use his advice to help others. The grandfather smiled quietly, pleased that his experiences could guide someone else. As the weeks passed, invitations came from various places. People wanted him to speak, to share his story at events, and to inspire others. Yet the grandfather politely declined, saying he was happy with his simple life. He did not need fame or recognition. What mattered most to him was the well-being of his family and the small ways he could help those around him. One evening, as he sat outside with his granddaughter, he noticed a car approaching. It was unusual for the village, and curiosity stirred among the neighbors. The car stopped, and a well-dressed man stepped out. He introduced himself and explained that he had been moved by the grandfather's story. He had come with the intent to offer help, support, and recognition for his dedication. The grandfather listened with quiet surprise, unsure of what to say. The man explained that his organization wanted to provide resources for the village, including better healthcare, education, and support for families. He emphasized that the grandfather's courage and selflessness had inspired them to act. The grandfather felt a mixture of humility and gratitude. He had never imagined that his small actions could reach so far and touch so many people. The villagers gathered to witness the moment, whispering among themselves in awe. Some could not believe that the man who had lived among them quietly, helping others without recognition, was now being acknowledged in such a way. The grandfather remained calm, his demeanor unchanged, simply listening and responding with gentle words. Over the following days, the organization worked closely with the grandfather and villagers. Improvements began in small but meaningful ways. A mobile clinic visited the village, teachers received support, and families gained access to resources they had never had before. The grandfather continued his daily routines, observing the changes with satisfaction, but never allowing them to alter his way of life. His heart remained devoted to the well-being of others, not to personal gain. As these changes unfolded, the grandfather's story spread further. Newspapers wrote articles, social media shared images of his quiet life, and more people began to understand the power of selflessness and perseverance. Yet he never sought recognition, always redirecting praise toward the community, emphasizing that it was collective effort and care that made a difference. Despite the attention, he faced challenges too. Some people approached with requests he could not fulfill. There were those who doubted his motives, believing he might change with recognition. He remained steadfast, consistent in his actions and words. Each challenge tested his patience and humility, but he continued to act with kindness, proving that integrity was stronger than doubt or skepticism. One evening, as the sun set over the village, he walked along the same path he had taken months ago to fetch medicine for his granddaughter. Memories of that journey flooded his mind, the exhaustion, the determination, and the love that had driven him. He realized that the small steps he had taken then had led to larger impacts than he could have imagined. It was not fame that mattered, but the ripple effect of selfless acts. His granddaughter often accompanied him on these walks, holding his hand and asking questions about his past journeys. He would tell her about perseverance, about helping others even when it was difficult, and about the importance of humility. These lessons were not just words. They were lived experiences, and she absorbed them with wide-eyed admiration. The grandfather began to see that his life was gradually transforming, not through desire, but through consequence. His small acts of courage and kindness had touched hearts far beyond the village. People began to learn from his example, and the village itself started to embody the values he had lived by all along. Evenings remained a time of reflection. He would sit quietly, watching the sky change colors and feeling the gentle wind on his face. He thought about the future, about the possibilities for his granddaughter and other children in the village. His mind was calm, filled with hope and understanding. He had walked kilometers for medicine once, but now he had walked even further in the journey of life, touching countless hearts along the way. The turning point had come, not as a sudden event, but as a gradual realization. His actions, small and humble, had meaning far beyond what he had imagined. Recognition, support, and admiration were not his goals, yet they came as a result of his unwavering dedication and love. He understood that life's true rewards were often quiet and indirect, born of patience, courage, and consistent kindness. Through it all, he remained the same man, humble, hardworking, and devoted. The world around him began to change, inspired by his example, but his heart remained anchored in the simple joys of family, community, and care for others. And as the village settled into another quiet night, the grandfather sat outside his home feeling a deep sense of peace. He had lived with integrity, and the ripple of his efforts was beginning to be felt far and wide. A quiet but powerful turning point in his life. The morning air was crisp, and the grandfather had just finished his usual chores in the small garden behind his house. He felt the familiar ache in his legs and hands, a reminder of years of work and long walks. His granddaughter ran around laughing, collecting flowers and placing them carefully in a small jar, while his wife prepared breakfast inside. Life was quiet, steady, and simple. Then, in the distance, the sound of engines broke the stillness. The grandfather looked up, shielding his eyes from the sun, and saw elegant cars driving slowly toward his small home. The village children ran to the roadside, curious and wide-eyed, while neighbors whispered among themselves, pointing toward the unusual sight. The grandfather felt a strange mix of curiosity and cautious surprise. He had lived a humble life, and this was something he had never expected. The cars stopped at the gate of his house. A group of well-dressed men and women stepped out, their expressions kind but formal. One of them approached the grandfather and introduced himself as a representative of an organization that had followed his story. They explained that they had come to honor his dedication, courage, and the countless acts of kindness he had performed for his family and the community. The grandfather listened quietly, feeling a mixture of humility and disbelief. He had never done anything with the thought of recognition. He had only acted out of love and duty. His granddaughter peeked from behind his legs, curious and slightly nervous. The grandfather smiled gently at her, squeezing her hand to reassure her that everything was safe. His wife appeared in the doorway, eyes wide with surprise, and stepped forward to greet the visitors. The air was filled with anticipation, and even the birds seemed to pause as the group began to speak. The visitors spoke of how the grandfather's simple acts had touched lives far beyond the village. They had come not just to offer words of admiration, but to provide tangible support for the family and the community. They presented small gifts at first, basic supplies, books for the children, and medical kits for the village. The grandfather accepted them politely, his voice calm and gentle, thanking them without arrogance. He insisted that he had done nothing extraordinary, only what anyone would do for their loved ones. Then the visitors began to explain their plans. They wanted to create opportunities for the children in the village, to improve health care, and to support local farmers. Their goal was to honor the grandfather's spirit by extending it to others. The grandfather listened intently, offering advice from his experience. He spoke simply about what the village needed most: consistent care, guidance for the young, and a sense of community. His words were thoughtful and grounded, reflecting the wisdom of a lifetime of humble work. The villagers gathered slowly, drawn by the unusual event at the grandfather's home. They watched in awe as the man who had lived among them quietly, helping others without seeking reward, was being honored in such a public and formal way. Some neighbors wiped their eyes, others whispered to each other, amazed that someone they had known for years could inspire such attention. Yet the grandfather remained calm, his humility intact. He did not want to overshadow the purpose of the visit, which was to help the community. Over the next few hours, the visitors toured the house and the small garden. They asked questions about the grandfather's daily life, his routines, and how he managed to care for his family and help others simultaneously. The grandfather answered simply, emphasizing patience, hard work, and the importance of kindness. He shared stories of his childhood, of long walks for necessities, and of the lessons his father had taught him about responsibility and compassion. At one point, one of the visitors asked to see the path he had walked months ago to fetch medicine for his granddaughter. The grandfather led them down the dusty trail, explaining the challenges he had faced along the way. He spoke of the heat, the fatigue, and the determination it took to reach the town. The visitors listened intently, taking notes and photographs, but the grandfather's focus was on sharing the story honestly, not on dramatizing it. He wanted them to understand the simple truth: love and duty can drive people to extraordinary effort. Back at the house, the visitors invited the grandfather to share his thoughts with a small gathering of village elders. He spoke modestly, emphasizing that recognition was not the goal. He wanted to stress the value of community, the importance of caring for one another, and the lessons that could be learned through consistent acts of kindness. The elders nodded, impressed by his clarity and humility. The gathering was quiet yet deeply moving, as the village collectively absorbed the grandfather's wisdom. Later in the day, the visitors presented a more significant gesture of support: financial aid for education and healthcare projects in the village. The grandfather accepted it with quiet dignity, insisting that the money be used wisely to benefit all, especially children and families in need. He explained that true help came not from charity alone, but from empowering people to improve their own lives. The visitors agreed, inspired by his insight and integrity. Throughout the day, the grandfather's family watched with a mixture of pride and amazement. His granddaughter followed him closely, learning firsthand about humility, gratitude, and perseverance. His wife remained quietly supportive, marveling at the recognition her husband had received. Yet despite all the attention, the grandfather remained focused on his family and community. He did not seek personal gain or glory, only to ensure that the village could thrive. As the sun began to set, the elegant cars prepared to leave. The visitors thanked the grandfather once more, praising his dedication, wisdom, and the positive influence he had on the village. They promised to maintain support for the projects and to continue spreading the story of his courage and kindness. The grandfather nodded, a gentle smile on his face expressing gratitude for their intentions without vanity. Once the cars drove away, the village returned to its quiet rhythm. But something had shifted. The grandfather's story was now known beyond the village borders, inspiring others to act with integrity and care. Children spoke about him with admiration. Neighbors felt a renewed sense of community, and families reflected on the value of small, consistent acts of kindness. That evening, the grandfather sat outside, watching the stars appear in the darkening sky. His granddaughter rested beside him, tired from a day full of excitement. He reflected on the events, feeling a deep sense of peace. Recognition had come, but it did not change him. He understood that true fulfillment came from living with love, courage, and integrity, not from external acknowledgement. The villagers continued to visit, asking for guidance or sharing their gratitude. The grandfather welcomed them all, teaching through example rather than instruction. He repaired broken fences, helped carry water, and offered advice when asked. Life continued with the same rhythm, but now it carried an added sense of hope and possibility. The support brought by the visitors allowed the village to grow, while the grandfather's presence reminded everyone of the value of humility and perseverance. Days turned into weeks, and the grandfather's life remained simple yet enriched by the changes around him. He continued to walk the same paths, care for his garden, and nurture his family. The recognition he had received did not alter his values. Instead, it amplified the impact of his quiet, steadfast work. The village thrived not just because of the external help, but because the grandfather had inspired a culture of kindness, responsibility, and integrity. In the evenings, he would sit with his granddaughter, telling her stories of courage and endurance. He emphasized the importance of small actions, patience, and love for others. She listened attentively, absorbing not only his words but the example of his life. Through these moments, the grandfather ensured that the lessons he had lived by would continue to guide the next generation. The elegance of the cars and the formal gestures of recognition had left an impression, but they were secondary to the grandfather. What mattered most was the knowledge that his family was safe. The village was improving, and the values he held dear were taking root in the hearts of those around him. His journey, once marked by miles of effort and struggle, had grown into a legacy of inspiration and positive change. Even as night fell and the village settled into quiet, the grandfather's mind remained serene. He had walked kilometers for medicine once, and now he had walked even further in life, touching hearts and creating opportunities for many. His story was no longer just about personal struggle. It had become a testament to the power of love, courage, and the enduring impact of a humble, kind heart. And in that quiet night, with the stars twinkling above, the grandfather sat peacefully, content that his life had made a difference, and that the ripple of his actions would continue far beyond the limits of the village. Months passed after the visitors left the village, and life slowly returned to a peaceful rhythm. The grandfather continued his daily routines, tending to his garden, helping neighbors, and teaching his granddaughter through stories and example. Though recognition had come, he remained humble, never letting it change who he was. The village had grown stronger, inspired by his actions, but his heart remained devoted to simple, honest living. His granddaughter often accompanied him during his daily walks. She asked many questions, eager to understand the lessons behind his actions. The grandfather explained gently that life was not about fame or wealth, but about helping others, being patient and living with integrity. He told her that each small act of kindness, no matter how unnoticed, had the power to change lives and inspire people around them. One morning, he noticed a group of children playing in the fields. They had started organizing small cleanup activities, helping elders and sharing with each other. Their parents explained that they had been inspired by the grandfather's example. Seeing the next generation embrace values of care and responsibility filled him with quiet pride. It was proof that his efforts, though small in the moment, had sown seeds that were now growing. The village elders often came to consult him on various matters. They valued his wisdom and experience not because he sought authority, but because his life had been a consistent example of courage, integrity, and compassion. The grandfather advised them simply, always emphasizing patience, understanding, and the importance of unity within the community. His words were plain, but they carried the weight of a life lived with purpose. Occasionally, letters and messages continued to arrive from people in nearby towns and cities. They spoke of how the grandfather's story had inspired initiatives for education, healthcare, and support for families in need. Though he never sought attention, he quietly appreciated knowing that his life had touched others. He would share the letters with his wife, reading them together and feeling a deep sense of contentment. One day, a young woman, now a doctor in a nearby town, visited the grandfather. She had followed his advice months ago about improving healthcare in villages and had successfully started a small medical camp in another rural area. She explained how his simple wisdom had guided her actions and saved lives. The grandfather listened, smiling gently, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. His life, built on small, steady acts of love and care, had multiplied in ways he had never imagined. Even with all the changes and recognition, the grandfather remained grounded. He still repaired roofs, helped carry water, tended to the garden, and ensured his granddaughter was learning the values he cherished. Life had grown richer around him, but he continued to live with the same simple principles. Humility, patience, and kindness were the heart of his life, and he practiced them daily. His granddaughter grew more observant and curious each day. She watched how people approached her grandfather with respect, and how he treated everyone with equal warmth and fairness. She began helping him in small ways, carrying water for the garden, tending to plants, and assisting neighbors. Through these experiences, she learned that true strength lay in service, love, and perseverance, values she would carry with her forever. Evenings remained a special time for the grandfather and his family. They would sit together under the stars, listening to the quiet sounds of the village settling down. He told stories of his past journeys, his experiences, and the lessons he had learned along the way. These stories were more than memories. They were living guidance filled with wisdom that shaped the lives of those around him. His family and neighbors absorbed these lessons, quietly carrying them into their own lives. The village itself changed gradually. People became more helpful, patient, and understanding. The culture of caring and respect spread not because of rules or authority, but because the grandfather had lived these values consistently. Every small action he had taken, every act of patience and kindness had created a ripple effect that transformed the community. His influence was subtle yet profound, leaving a mark that would endure long after he was gone. One day, a visitor returned from the organization that had recognized the grandfather months earlier. They brought news of more projects inspired by his story. Schools were being built, healthcare programs expanded, and families received support to improve their lives. The grandfather listened with quiet humility, grateful that his life had inspired good, but he continued to focus on his family and the daily care he provided to those around him. Recognition was not important. Making a positive difference was. As the seasons changed, the grandfather often walked alone in the fields near his home. He reflected on the journey of his life, the long walks for necessities, the effort to care for his family, and the quiet acts of kindness that had now reached far beyond the village. He realized that the true measure of a life well lived was not wealth or fame, but the love and positive influence one leaves behind. Even in moments of fatigue, he continued to persevere. His hands ached from work, his legs from long walks, but his spirit remained strong. Every effort was motivated by love, by duty, and by a desire to make life better for his family and neighbors. This perseverance became a living example for everyone around him, showing that courage and determination could overcome any challenge. He often thought back to the day he had walked kilometers to fetch medicine for his granddaughter. That journey had been difficult, exhausting, and full of obstacles, yet it was one of the most important moments of his life. It had been a simple act of love that had led to much greater impacts than he could have imagined. It reminded him that no effort done with pure intention is ever wasted. The grandfather's life continued in this quiet, purposeful rhythm. He shared his wisdom, helped his neighbors, and nurtured his granddaughter. Recognition and support had come, but they never changed his heart. He remained devoted to simple living, humble service, and the steady practice of values that truly mattered. In the evenings, as the village settled and the sky filled with stars, he would sit quietly on the wooden bench outside his house. His granddaughter often sat beside him, listening to his words, observing his actions and learning the lessons of life firsthand. The grandfather felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that his life had been meaningful, not because of wealth or recognition, but because of love, courage, and integrity. The village thrived, influenced by his example. Yet the grandfather remained humble, continuing to walk the same paths, help the same neighbors, and care for the same family. The ripple of his actions, however, extended far beyond what he could see, inspiring people in nearby villages and towns. His legacy was not in fame or fortune, but in the lives he had touched, the values he had instilled, and the hope he had given to countless hearts. The final chapters of his life were filled with quiet fulfillment. He knew that his work had made a difference, that his actions had inspired others, and that the values he lived by would continue to guide future generations. The grandfather's journey, which began with simple acts of love and perseverance, had grown into a lasting impact that would be remembered long after his steps had faded from the paths he walked. In this way, the grandfather's life became a testament to the power of humility, courage, and kindness. He had walked kilometers for medicine, yes, but he had also walked through life with a heart full of love, leaving a trail of inspiration that would endure. And as the stars shone above the quiet village, he sat peacefully, content in knowing that a simple life lived with integrity could change the world in ways he had never imagined.